All right. To be respectful of everybody's time, it is 3 o'clock. We'll get this thing rocking and rolling. Please check that you're muted. If keyboard typing and the rest of it in the background. So please make sure you got your mute on. And in enforcing Randy's idea about the issue of showing your screen, you don't necessarily have to, but just be aware. I'm here. I'm going to talk to you about Underground Utilities Mapping Project Team. It's October, obviously 7th, and here we go. Just as a reminder, and I think Randy's already to some degree pointed this out, the Underground Utilities Mapping Project Team actually sits as just one of the functions of the EPC. And the reason I point this out is we often get U.S. National Grid hung around our necks as the only thing we do, and far from it. So just a reminder, we're going to be talking about one of the project teams of the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And here's the flow of what we're going to chat about. First, I'm going to tell you or I should say, I'll walk through what I believe to be the problem. Then we'll talk about why a collaborative effort has gotten underway called the Underground Utility Mapping Project Team. Then we're going to focus things in on one item of underground infrastructure, and that's pipeline threats. And then we'll scope it down even more to talk about Minnesota pipes. And then finally, we'll chat about the plan. What's the idea behind the effort going forward, how to fix where we are? So here's the bottom line. More and more stuff is going underground every day. And in fact, annually now, 300,000 miles of fiber is getting put underground every year. On the left-hand side there, you're looking at what New York City looked like in 1917. And obviously, they didn't have GIS back then to map where all that stuff was. The right-hand side of the screen, what you're getting a chance to see is, I was downtown Minneapolis for the last 3 years going, why is it taking them so long to fix the streets down here? Well, there you've got a visual of all of the different kinds of stuff that exist underneath the streets. And most of us go unaware that the infrastructure is built to that degree. If you go down to the bottom of the slide, the leftmost and the center give you some sense of some of the things that are down there. And as I indicated, principally now we're looking at cable and fiber being the big things that are being placed underground. And then there's the reality of that rightmost box there, the different kinds of things down there, some of it which you just simply can't detect with a metal detector. And even more importantly, you've got things such as wood pipe and the rest of it that just by virtue of deterioration requires that you've got to be ripping the ground up to do maintenance over time. So I think within this crowd, most of you are thinking we've got all this great technology, augmented reality and, great GIS development stuff. But, is this the state of the art in the underground utility sector? Well, unfortunately, the reality is not this, it's this. Nationwide, we do not comprehensively know what's underground. Both the what and where element are lacking. The result is you see nationwide construction damage to all types of utilities. In 2020, the U.S. estimated damage was over 30 billion rather. The incidents have been steadily increasing in this state until 2020. And of course, we had the COVID pullback in construction can be related directly to why that would be the case, where we had a drop off actually. Gopher State 1 call, it was created in 1987 after a pipeline hit. They were excavating up in Mounds View, and that explosion killed a young mother and her baby. They were standing on a front porch watching what was going on, and they hit a pipeline, and there you go. So that created the effort to put an 811 service in place, call before you dig, and that Gopher State 1 call serves that function for the entire state. Oddly enough, you might not be aware of it, but Minnesota is considered to be one of the best states in the union for damage prevention. But if you look at that statistic down there at the bottom, that in 2020, the best guess is there were 4,542 hits on underground infrastructure. Now, if you were to get in an airplane and fly with a company that had 4,542 accidents in a year, the likelihood of you getting on that airplane would be probably like zero. So the top category in 2020 was telecom because they were busily installing lots of stuff. But in 2019, it was natural gas. So out of that 4,542, approximately in both those cases, the number of hits was 2,000. Then there's this problem. Because of the level of infrastructure that's down there, and because of the need to respond when any work gets done on, the surface, or is going to involve digging around where underground infrastructure may be. In 2020, Gopher State One Call handled on one day, they handled 7,000 calls for locates. And the requirements for those locates are they've got to be marked within 48 hours, and they're only good for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, GIS and GPS tech have been rapidly evolving since Gopher State One Call was created. For the GIS folks that are on this call, get your brain around this. The one call ticket system that Gopher State One Call uses, the styling for the map that gets printed out on the ticket that goes out is over 20 years old. Okay, and the US is well behind Europe in mapping underground infrastructure. There's some ongoing, very aggressive efforts involved in the European Union, and specifically in the United Kingdom. You'll see a couple of slides here in a bit on that. But so although we're rated as one of the top prevention states, the Gopher State One Call community knows that they need to leverage GIS tech to improve efficiency and safety. This is well known. It's like nobody doubts it. And kind of here's why: because we're effectively using technology that's more than 50 years old in locating and then trying to excavate around underground infrastructure. If you're not familiar with the process, it starts in that upper left-hand corner. And what happens is when you call Gopher State One Call and you need to have something marked in your yard, or it's a large construction area, there's a different combination of how the locators will end up out there. But basically what they do is they carry I think it's called a magnetometer along to try to find where they think underground infrastructure is. And as they go along, they're using a paint can on the end of a stick to mark where that stuff is. And then, as you can see in that upper right-hand corner, sometimes that marking can be a little bit complicated and hard to determine what exactly is where down there.
No.
And in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the issue of what we're up against in the northern tier states with the combination of snow and frozen ground, and the ability to, how do you mark snow that melts? And then finally, supposing all this effort goes right and the guy gets in the backhoe and goes to dig around, you're hoping that he can run that efficiently enough to stay within the bounds and not hit something. So that's kind of the background of how all that stuff works. And here are some of the current issues. And I want to reinforce the word some. Gopher State One, so they kind of break down into three sort of categories: technical, education, procedures, and standards. So technical, Gopher State One Call does not have a complete map view, nor do the utilities. Just because data is in GIS doesn't mean it's accurate, and some utilities are still using paper. Fragmentation, even inside organizations. If you go over to St. Paul and want to talk to somebody about water, and then you want to talk to somebody about wastewater, those are in two different parts of the administrative structure of St. Paul. Then there's the education piece. There's no training standards for locators. There's no training standards for the guys that are running the backhoes. And then here is the killer of them all across the whole spectrum. It's large. This is the boogeyman. It is largely unknown that collaborate, not collect, is possible within the range of geospatial data. Everybody is concerned that if they participate in a way of trying to make this better, somebody else is going to get a hold of their utility data. And through many of the efforts that have gone on in Europe and to even to some degree in this state, that reality in the GIS community is just not true. And so this is an educational thing that needs to be, if you will, a broadcast across the entire sector. And then there's procedures and standards. There's no standards for capturing, storing, or sharing locate data. The abandoned and unknown lines, they're being run across all the time, and there is no effort or no, if you will, ingest point for anyone that would like to report that stuff. And then finally, there's a liability issue. If I give you my GIS data and you hit something, I don't want to be on the hook for it. Okay, so this is a recognized problem, but what do we do? Here's kind of a sobering thing. Here's the most current best practices version out of the Common Ground Alliance. They're like the place to go for information on what we're supposed to be doing about fixing this. And what does it say here? What things are their use is not widespread in damage prevention field, GIS, global positioning, orthographic and satellite imagery. And then down here is like one of the latest reports to Congress. There are 5 key findings on this report to Congress. And it basically says, number 3 is improve and implement GPS GIS technology in accurately locating and documenting the location of underground facilities. Everybody kind of knows who Mike Rowe is. Well, he went out for one day on one of these locating events and saw all of the problems and then said, hey, how about if I try to help out and get the word out on this, because this is not good. Anyway, right about now, and I want to slay it before it gets out of the gate. Somebody is thinking in the back of their head that this really isn't a GIS issue. It really sounds more like it's an engineering issue to me. Well, just like great taste and less filling being shouted back and forth, the reality is it's both. On the one side, the construction piece needs to adhere to a level of standards in putting stuff in the ground and then recording it. And then on the other side, the GIS community has to be doing their part to ensure things are accurately recorded and developed and transmitted in a way that supports OGC standards, which is Open Geospatial Consortium stuff. Okay, so now we move on to what are we trying to do about this? Well, there was a series of discussions that I was involved in that went back the better part of 3 years. And finally, in August of 2020, it was decided between myself and Barb Cederberg over at Gopher State One Call that we needed to have kind of a marriage here and go down the road to get things rolling. So Gopher State One Call folks bring the operational understanding of the utility sector and how things operate, the one ticket system and the rest. And of course, this Emergency Preparedness Committee brings the expertise in the geospatial world. And then we also have kind of a division of services in that we look to Barb to lead the operational intent of what we're doing. And I, through my services on the Emergency Preparedness Committee, provide the administrative piece, the Zoom calls, the recording of events, publishing stuff, to provide basically what is a vendor neutral forum for the discussion of this topic. We don't want a vendor to come in and slay the process right from the get-go. So here's the mission statement. The Underground Utilities Mapping Project Team will work to improve locate efficiencies and accuracy, reduce damage to the state's underground infrastructure, and improve operational and construction safety by leveraging current and emerging GIS technologies through cross-community collaboration, which develops best practices and promotes technology solutions. This is not only going to benefit the 811 community. There's lots of people, and I see Charlie, you're on the call today. MnDOT is going to be a beneficiary of this. The Department or Office of Pipeline Safety, MnGeo was going to gain insight on where stuff is. The construction community is going to, have their timelines dramatically reduced on their build efforts. Minnesota Department of Health has an opportunity here to have a better understanding of where there may be points of pollution that impact human health. Similarly, what goes on over at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Minnesota DNR, since they're worried about flora and fauna, they would have a benefit there. And then finally, the business community. Nothing is worse than having your fiber cut in the middle of a business operation like dispatching airplanes as an example. So yeah, there's a lot of potential other beneficiaries out of the totality of this effort. So this came out of the gate with great fanfare. We had initially 35 individuals that stepped forward, and I've highlighted just a few of them to give you a sense of it is both horizontally and vertically a very engaged group of folks that want to see this problem fixed. So you start with the chief operating officer of Gopher State One Call. Their general counsel is participating in this. Jeff Zeiss, who I think some of you may be aware of, was literally the think tank for a company called AutoCAD, and basically is across the border in Ottawa, Canada. He's providing us sort of an international perspective because he's hooked into lots of folks around the world. We've got media communications manager for Damage Prevention Pro. She's involved, and the president of Infrastructure Resources. This original 35 member group, as always happens, folks start to drop out. We're now down to about 20 folks that are really, no kidding, carrying the water and doing fantastic work. We're broken down into 4 functional areas. We've got facility operator, utility mapping. Just, you can really think of that one as, where is that buried stuff? They're the people that find that stuff. Then you got the locate data flows and management, and they're really about telling others where the buried stuff is located. That's the heavy GIS piece of working towards, where is all that stuff. Then there's the outreach piece that's creating engagement and improving safety awareness. And finally, regulations and security, current situation and a path forward, because there is going to be issues here about how you structure and word things to try to achieve a collaborative volunteer participation in this effort. And to the degree that we can do that, that's what the focus is. Project team, all the members, we each meet, I should say there's a project team, that's all members, and then each of these subgroups meet once a month. So that's 2 meetings per month for each member. Okay, so let's go talk about some pipeline threats. What possibly could be happening out there? Well, ironically, the number one poster child in really big, bad, and ugly when it comes to pipeline events involves bad GIS data. And this is an incident that happened in San Bernardino, California on September 9th, 2010. Basically, the essence of it is PG&E, to meet demand, was needing to boost pressure in their pipe, as it's indicated here, 132. And in managing to do that, they blew up a good part of the neighborhood, killing 8 people. Not only killing 8 people, but they basically blew 499 people out of their homes. There are over $600 million in lawsuit settlements. The Public Utility Commission fine in California was 1.6 billion, down from the original fine of 4 billion. And even to this day, 11 years after this incident, there are still over 4 billion in state and federal pending legal action ongoing in the California and federal court system. And how this all happened, as I highlighted it down below, is PG&E ironically was one of the first utilities to move from paper maps to GIS, and the conversion was sloppy. And they ended up with not knowing exactly where stuff was. And these engineers knew things weren't exactly perfect. And as it says down here, Arnett admitted that he only made a cursory review of the GIS database before authorizing the increase of pressure in a line. And this is what you get. So there's 4 in this scenario. Let's move on to what number 2 looks like. Well, bad GIS data. We now move on to a construction hit. And this is no kidding. Everybody knows where the item is, and guys still go out with backhoes or whatever and hit stuff. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, 1 dead, 3 injured, Bakersfield, California, November 13, 2015. Upper right-hand corner, October 31st, Halloween, just in time, 1 dead, 5 injured, down in Shelby County, Alabama. A major, I think it was ironically, I think it was a Columbia pipeline company, or Colonial, I'm sorry. And then down lower left-hand corner, right next door, we're in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, 1 dead, 2 injured, 2018. And miraculously, this is downtown San Francisco, no one injured as we blew up part of downtown. So again, no one pipe, everybody knows where it is, and you still hit it. Then there's this lovely kind of event, and this is hitting an abandoned pipe, or in this case, a construction crew previously damaged a abandoned pipeline that had been previously used to collect gas off a field in Colorado. And then the homeowner and his brother were downstairs doing some upgrading to something, and one thing led to another, and they had a spark that ended up blowing up their house and 3 or 4 around the block. And so this whole event, probably well north of 60 million before it was ever settled. The city allowed homes to be built over pipes which were basically not mapped. Nobody thought, well, it's abandoned, why would we worry about it? That's why you worry about it. Okay, let's move on to number 4. Pipeline structural failure. Very few people are aware that on March 3rd, 1991, the largest inland oil spill in U.S. history occurred in this state when 1.7 million gallons of crude were pumped out over the top of the Prairie River near Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And the only saving grace in this particular incident was the fact that it was frozen. The river was frozen over, which allowed the cleanup crews to get in there and get this stuff cleaned up before it truly got massively into the environment. And, short of that, if it had happened in spring, again, pipeline structural failure, you would have had a good part of the Prairie River and the area near Grand Rapids polluted by, a substantial pump of crude. Well, over on the right-hand side, July 4th, 2002, same pipeline failed with 252,000 gallons of crude getting pumped out. And the result of that, weighing the opportunities to clean it up in summer or to pollute the air, the answer was to burn it. So up into the air, this stuff went. Bad deal. So let's take a look now and think a little bit about Minnesota petroleum pipes. There are basically 3 kinds of pipes that are out running around. First one is production collection. Obviously, that's an issue in Texas and Louisiana, so it's not an issue in Minnesota. Then there's transport. Minnesota, it ranks 17th in the nation in the number of miles of interstate gas and liquid pipeline in the state, which for the fact that we're not producing anything is a very high ranking. The Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety, which has oversight on this transport system, is considered to be one of the best in the nation. And in fact, they're rated in as there's only 4 in the United States. It may have changed a little bit. I'm not exactly sure of the status right now, but as of 2019, there were only 4 states that had been given the federal oversight responsibility for their pipeline system. So we've got a good team there at the Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety. And they have a handle on pipelines that have been, these major transport pipelines that have been capped off or abandoned. Those locations are known, and those pipelines are maintained with inert gas and things of that nature. But where the whole equation becomes the Wild West is once it gets to a point of distribution and gets sent out into the neighborhood, there is, since 1998, there's been an effort to stay on top of what gets abandoned or is no longer in use, maybe maintained for a period of time. But before that, no one has any idea where all of those pipes are because there was no requirement to stay on top of that. So if you kind of scope out and look at what's happened here in Minnesota, the Minnesota natural gas line pipe hits in 2020 were 1,652. And down below were more or less the last 5 big ones in the state. I had one just up the street from me back here in 2018, where just outside of the health club I go to, well, not anymore, but they managed to pump out on one of the connections between the refinery and the gas line that went out to the airport for aviation fuel. It looks like we had about just under $2 million worth of damage out of that event. So just to give you a sense, it doesn't happen often, but it happens to the degree that we see something maybe every couple of years. And kind of a real ironic thing about this is, in talking to the insurance industry about this circumstance, they're like, we don't care about all these little hits. We don't care about any of that. The only thing they care about is the 1 billion plus loss. They say we have one in the United States pretty much every year. And they say that's what we're worried about. So when was the last time we had a big, bad, ugly here in the state of Minnesota? It was December 11th, 1998. Sure. And where St. Cloud, Minnesota had the last big one. That's 4 dead, 1 seriously injured. Basically, they were installing fiber in downtown St. Cloud, and they hit a gas main. There's also 10 injured and 6 buildings destroyed. So they can be significant events which don't pass from the memory very quickly. So what's the plan to fix where we are? In conjunction, this project team is attempting to do a first in the nation effort. We're trying to take technology to go from being reactive to being preventive. We're trying to make an approach which honors effectively the entire state, not just a department or a division, but the entire state. So as indicated, our first meeting was in August of 2020. And that was the stand-up of the project team. Some pilot projects were started, and we put up a YouTube channel because we felt that as a result of us going forward with this effort, other states would want to have the opportunity to view the technologies we examined and maybe hear some of the deliberations that we had as a committee. So all of that stuff is posted up online. Then in 2021, our charter has been to continue expanding our research efforts. We initially had planned on doing some, if you will, local presentations and some articles in, like, again, local publications, and then start developing an improvement plan. Followed in 2022 by first quarter, looking to release our improvement plan, approaching some national conferences to see if they'd be interested in us participating, and then working that national conferences effort to elicit additional feedback. And then with 2023, with Gopher State One Call, being able to have a blueprint of what they want to do going forward, they'd be able to expand some self-help efforts. They would look to achieve volunteer compliance within the community. They would look to do regulatory as needed, and finally start doing a maintenance of their GIS tech. And so this is all about more accurate maps, ability to share data, and finally achieve safer excavation through this effort. We're actually running a little bit ahead on schedule here, in that we were an invited presentation to the national CGA event, and then also the worldwide excavation event in Phoenix. So we're actually running ahead in that component. So you're aware of it. There are some other states out there who have already put in place some regulatory answers for their circumstances. And that incident that I showed you in Colorado, where the home blew up as a result of the unknown or abandoned pipeline, resulted in a flurry of legislative activity. And I'm not going to drive down into this. It's just trying to make you aware that their effort here was focused largely on facilitating awareness of anything that goes into the CDOT right away, is the main focus of what they've done. And Montana has done something similar in trying to ensure that certain standards and certain collection of GIS data is done in a very regimented way in supporting efforts of recording it and displaying it for right-of-way work for the state of Montana. Overseas, things that we've looked at very carefully with and coordinated with is the National Underground Asset Registration in the United Kingdom. Is a well advanced. They originally started out as a consortium of universities trying to tackle the same problem that we're going after. And then the Scottish Roadworks Commission, in both cases, these have started out as a largely focused roads effort, again, on that right-of-way piece. And at the Scottish Roadworks Commissioner effort, they have this thing called the vault. And the original idea was to put everything into the vault, but now they're evolving in the direction of sharing without collecting. And then there's some really off-the-wall wild stuff out there. In this case, 4M Analytics out of Israel is actually using satellite imagery and object-based identification to make determination as to where underground infrastructure is. And this grew out of largely the effort in the Golan Heights to determine where mines had been put in, and they've basically taken the same technology and they're now applying it to underground infrastructure mapping. As I indicated earlier, the components break down into, we've got up on a YouTube site, anything that we've done is available for folks to catch up on. We have got a slate of events going forward, as indicated here, after the Clean Water Council on February 26th. That kind of got the pump prime for this agenda item that will come forward either on the 18th of October or the 15th of November. The Common Ground Alliance event, we've already beat that up. The association, or as the American Public Works Association, Barb will be speaking to them on November 18th. Damon Knowlton will be speaking at GIS-LS on October 29th in the Global Excavation Safety Conference. We've been featured in the Damage Prevention Pro magazine, talking about the project and what we're trying to do. And we're seeing a lot of interest from other communities. Pennsylvania, we just had a long exchange with them. We framed up a plan for developing the document that's going to support the outside delivery of what we've learned from this and what we believe the course forward would be. And to do that, one of the things that you're forced into doing is trying to figure out what the big picture is of an effort like this. And so ultimately, what we want to have come out of this process is a ticketing system that has a robust mapping system in it, a way to deliver to the excavator that augmented reality view that I've showed you, from the backhoe perspective, and then also a system which will allow operational planning and the submission of those plans. And one of the interesting things that we've learned from Pennsylvania is they actually have a system which allows people to come in and share before a construction effort gets underway, the information about that construction effort. So example would be, before you repave a street, it's an opportunity for various utilities to come in and do their utility work. It's just a way to broadcast that's what's going to be taking place. And as it shows here, there's a large number of inputs that would go into a database that would serve these three functions up here. Everything from engineering to the state to the federal databases, a way to try to create a database for abandoned and unregistered infrastructure that's found in the field. There may be a need for small organizations that have infrastructure data for that to be hosted. We're looking at the circumstance that many of the rural communities don't have a GIS component, and maybe the LOGIS circumstance implies a way forward of creating a consortium that would serve the rural community and be able to provide that input into a larger collaborative system, which provides for this fusion view, OGC compliant container that transforms and fuses input data streams on demand and delivers output as requested by the respective system. And the way that we secure data, the plan is to use a bounding box approach, which limits the view that any individual has of the area in which they're working, so that only the area that's impacted is seen, not that they get to search the complete Centratel or Xfinity fiber system as to where it is and the rest of it. And then there's the locator component down here, issues of standards and the latest ingest capability here. And so our pilot project right now is demonstrated that, in fact, the concept that's here for the locator guys over here can be facilitated and plugged into Gopher State One Call's current system provided by One Call Concepts. And just for that one component that we just looked at here, here's a representative schematic that will have to be done for each of those components so that we fully understand how the hookup's going to need to work. And I know this looks pretty basic, but the bottom line here is this level of map is a first-time capability at Gopher State One Call. So again, I'm driving home the point that we're trying to bring an organization from basically the 1970s, the 1980s, forward by 40, 50 years. And again, I know for many of this will look simple, but that's the effort and why it's underway. Okay, the next piece here is kind of one of the final slides here is the plan. We're focused on creating solutions, not delving or staying stuck on the idea that the problems are so great we'll never be able to figure it out. So this slide just gives you a sense of, we've broken it down into kind of 4 things: planning, managing, locating, and security and legal. All right, so with all of that effort underway, that's ultimately where we get to the ability to use this augmented reality and other approaches that, as it sits right now, are only pie in the sky, except for a very limited area. And again, for the guy working in the cab, he would have access to that in a way which would tell him the appropriate areas to dig in and how to avoid things. So the technology is there to do this. We're trying to overcome institutional inertia, and it's a matter of will and to degree money. And anytime anybody asks us about the money issue, the closing thought would be this: the return on the investment of every dime that goes into this project and getting it moving forward is, every time we have an accident, what's the value of a life? What's the value of disruption of commerce, slowed construction, damage to the environment, exposure to another big one? We need to be working towards the aviation standard of 0 accident rate. And with that, that concludes my blab. And I put Barb's contact information up there. She's exceptionally open to discussion. If anybody would like to give her a call, if you got ideas about how to do things and think I ought to be fired or whatever the case is, she's the gal to talk to. And with that, floor is open. Anybody have any questions?
I'll start, Steve. So I think part of this may at least be viewed as a threat to a rather large industry, the people that go out there and paint the lines in the road. And you and I were both at the CGA conference in Phoenix and had an opportunity to walk around through the vendor area. You got this whole One Call Concepts, who has built a fortune, I believe, enough to go and build a custom Orange County chopper motorcycle that they were so proud of showing off at the conference, off of ancient technology. The fact that we don't have what you're talking about has built them a small fortune. I ran into this actually at Gopher State One Call a few years ago. Dakota County was paying. We have to pay for the tickets that they issue because the county owns underground infrastructure, fiber lines, and so then we have to go out and locate those fiber lines. If we got somebody going around painting lines where our stuff is in the ground to make sure it doesn't get hit. Well, they were generating tickets based on a spatial index of square miles. So county roads tend to be at the intersections of even miles, right? And so if we have something at an intersection, it would activate the surrounding 4 square miles. And we were getting hit with tickets for things that were happening a mile away. And so, the discussion that we had with Gopher State One Call is we've got pretty good GIS data for where our fiber lines are. Can't we just give you the lines and maybe a polygon that is our area of concern in proximity to those fiber lines, and you just tell us when there's something that's going to be in there? Well, they've progressed beyond doing this 1 square mile thing, but they're still doing it based on kind of a defaulting to a rather large area to make sure that they don't miss anything. But the reality, though, is that their income, their funding comes from the number of tickets they issue. So anything that we do to improve the information that they have about where our underground infrastructure is decreases their bottom line. They make less money because they're issuing less tickets. So there's kind of a counter incentive here to do things better, because you got a whole industry that's built on going out painting lines in the road and running around with magnetometers. You've got this whole one call concepts making a small fortune off of this stuff. It's just ridiculous. And something like Overstate One Call, which, by the way, is a nonprofit organization, but their funding comes from the tickets that they issue. They issue less tickets, they make less money. So have you recognized this kind of a counter influence on your whole process? And having Barb Cedarberg involved in this, she must get that. I mean, obviously it's the right thing to do, but how does that come into play?
Okay, so let me respond. First of all, clearly it's problematic when you have an entire industry. I mean, just going to the CGA event. That CGA event, as you've described it, is about an entire industry that's been built around not wanting to find stuff. So
not having good locations for stuff.
Yeah. Clearly that's understood. And that's part of the institutional inertia we're up against. No doubt about it. Okay. The second element is I'm not quite sure. First of all, I would tell you, Barb is a retired 3M chemist. She's worked for a couple of Glenn Taylor companies. She's as sharp as they come, I feel. And to the degree that she's trying to move this forward, I think that tells you a lot about trying to respond to the reality of where we are, that we just can't keep doing what we're doing, because it's not going to work. So that's all I can say to that.
But the real winners here, I mean, going and presenting at the CGA conference, it's like the sheep presenting to the wolves or something like that. It's kind of the opposite. I mean, the real winners of this are the owners of the infrastructure, not the locators of the infrastructure.
Again, I think as technology changes an equation, there's always parts of a business structure that I mean, do you still go down and rent or check out VHS tapes at Blockbuster? I mean, that's just reality. Things change. So that's all I'm saying.
So this is Harvey. I just want to say how impressive and exciting this is, and as has already been restated, the case for doing this is so compelling. And so I'm so impressed, and I just want to provide my perspective on how this is part of the agenda for mapping the underground. Depending on how you define underground, the underground consists of bathymetry, soil mapping, underground structures, and geology. And those fields operate separately, and that's fine. I don't know if I have anything to contribute to underground structures, but I sure am interested, because I have to map the stuff that those pipes, wires, and tunnels are installed in. And I can help with ease of excavation. Installing a pipe or wire in sand is a whole lot different from installing it in bouldery till or shallow bedrock. And so that's my job, to map the geology. But some of these underground fields can learn from each other. I'm really working hard to learn from soil mapping. I think geological mapping has a lot to learn from soil mapping, so I've really been working hard on that. And I think it's good for us to be aware of each other in the underground. I organized the National Geological Mapping Conference, which is now a monthly online meeting in the COVID era. So last week was our first session of the season, and one of our speakers last week at that national online conference was Jeff Zeiss. And Steve, you can imagine, Jeff makes a very compelling case. And so again, I just think this is incredibly impressive and important, and I really applaud the effort that is going into this.
Well, Harvey, thank you very much for those comments. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Are there a lot of Gopher State One Call users here that actually use the ticketing system?
I would
You-
think on this call, you probably got, I'll bet there isn't a single person on this call that uses the Gopher State.
Well, not personally, but Dakota County does.
I've-
Yes,
Well, I actually have it on the screen right now because we provide a WMS service to Gopher State One Call and their managed tickets. It's the group that does the mapping for them as a service. That's a separate company from
Yeah.
Gopher State, as we should all understand that. And at one time it was Cortera, now it's OCC Inc. or whatever they are.
One Call
And
Concepts.
One Call Concepts. And so and that could be subject to nothing. You showed a map that doesn't look like anything I see when I log into this stuff. That must be a prototype or something. But
That's in fact, that is in fact correct. That is a prototype that just literally within the last month came online. And there's anybody with a trained eye is going to look at it and say, man, there's a lot of problems here. But the point is that that test, Charlie, was about, could they go into the field with a GPS enabled locator, use the data that came off the locator to update. They were using basically a pilot city in a small town, actually, who owned all of its infrastructure to update the database and then bring it in to the OCC system. So that was the test piece that went on there.
yeah. So we have a WMS. That's all that I know that we could put through to them. We had been doing it with Cortera when they were doing the mapping, and now we do it with OCC Inc. And they at first it was a little bit difficult for them to grab it, but they finally grabbed it and they got it. And we have these facility operator polygons around our highways that if an excavator box or a hot box goes in there, we get the calls and then people start looking at it. Should we take that ticket or not? Should we they vet that ticket? And then if they go, wow, that's pretty close to our stuff, we go in. And we have some of our utilities going through there. And there's all kinds of utilities. There's of course fiber optics. There's all of the wires. There's sewers and drainage systems. And there are geotechnical fabrics and geotechnical structures. There are all kinds of stuff down there. So, but some of it is mapped well in GIS and some of it's not mapped so well. And we have a general goal to try and get things to about a meter if we can in the bulk. And that would be helpful. That would be helpful, but it probably has to be more. So there's the aspect that I'm thinking is that we have to get a vendor that can actually, hopefully they can take more than WMSs. They can take feature classes, and we can get maybe a little more 3D about this, because this is all 2D stuff, and 2D helps. It helps a lot, but it's the 3D has got to get there, and all of the accuracy of our inputs to this system has to go up a little bit, I think, or at least it has to be understandable, so that, for example, when I give those our WMS it's hardly has a legend. The MnDOT guys who are looking at this ticket system can tell what they are. They can look at it on a whole different series of maps if they have to do that, and interrogate what they see in both maps, but they're flipping back and forth. But if there's an awful lot of work to do here, an awful lot.
Oh yeah, we're well aware of it.
All right.
Charlie, I'd be curious what kind of process you're using at MnDOT, because that sounds a little bit more sophisticated than what we're doing. We're actually sending data, I think, to go for one. And it sounds like you have.
We send a service to them. They had first said, can you send us our data? And I said, well, you want it every day? You want it every week? You want it and I got crickets. I said, well, how about
Yeah.
we try this? How about we give you a service that we keep up to date all the time? And so whenever that service is being viewed, it's there. So we have that going right now, but we don't have all of our stuff in there either. It's pretty much the lighting and utility and the fiber guys that got stuff in there, but there's more stuff that we could put in here, a lot more. The geotechnical stuff is not in there. It's just pretty much the utilities and the lighting. Some of the underground drainage, storm sewer kind of stuff that's in there too, and there's a lot. But yeah, it seems like we could go a lot better. Well, the next time they hire these vendors, they have to go and bid for this, right? OCC had to bid over Cortera, over whoever does this.
Yeah.
But
So
next time they go out and get a vendor, we got to make sure those vendors can do this stuff.
yeah, and so Charlie,
hope
so you're aware of it. This idea here is that we are, the intent is not to build directly into OCC. The intent is to build upstream for, if you will, fusion aggregation of WMS, WFS services into something that gets redistributed up the line. So if they fire, for instance, OGC, which I don't see happening, but the point is if OGC goes away, then it becomes whoever the new service provider to go for. It's just so everybody understands that,
Right.
Gopher State One Call as an entity does not handle the calls. They hire a company to do that, and that company currently is One Call Concepts. And so the vision right now is we build upstream to feed down to these other modules that would be used. So where it says Minnesota State databases, well, MnDOT Centerline or the archaeological data, because in the planning module, you're going to want to know where that archaeological, sites might be, or in this case, sensitive species for the EPA. This is all going to have to be worked through. And this is the phase we're now moving into, is the phase to work through the build on this. And this actually probably end up being a TC mug kind of an approach to putting something together.
Well, the technology certainly exists to pipe the stuff in. We can do this all day long, and we do it too. We can make WFS, WMS features of all of this stuff fairly quickly with fairly robust back-end systems to keep them up to date. And I think that there's the 3D-ness of this. That would be a real groove. I don't know if we're going to get there or not very quick, but I guess we'll get the 2D down first.
So one of the dimensions on the record of the new style of locators facilitates within, I think it is 5 centimeters in depth. So that advancement, and then if you will, procedurally encouraging this part of the system over here, where you've got either a corporate locator or a contract locator or city locator going on and collecting stuff to updating their databases with that level of data, that will over time facilitate that 3D piece.
Anyway, thanks for the time. Just had to chip in there.
This is Shauna from the Pollution Control Agency. I remember hearing an announcement about this initiative forming like a year or so ago, right? And I kind of dropped the ball, but I got notice of this meeting, so I decided to hop on. And what I do at the PCA, or one of the things that I do, are managing our institutional controls. So it's our record of contamination left in place in the ground. And so we have a data set now, and we're kind of going back and fixing some of it, right, and adding some features. But we publish it on the Geospatial Commons, and it's updated daily. And I'd love to see it included. We do get people from Go for One and other companies, when they kind of clue in that there might be contamination, contacting us for this information. And it'd be pretty awesome if it was all together.
I would, I'd love to connect with you. So I don't know if you've scrolled my email down or whatever.
I did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please, by all means, shoot me an email and let's start talking.
Yeah.
Because that's important stuff. Thank you.
A couple other states do it, but not too many.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, anything else out there?
I just shared a link in the chat. Somebody told me a few years ago that Japan actually embarked on a major initiative to do 3D mapping, and actually requires it of anybody that's putting anything in the ground. And as a result, they do have very good 3D mapping of everything that's underground. And then the article actually references the number of accidents have been recorded, and it's extremely low in Japan.
Yeah, that's Roduck or Radek or forget the proper name.
Rotus.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of the background piece on that is, for instance, in Kyoto, because it was the ancient, capital of Japan, every piece of infrastructure to every house is recorded in great detail, because there's still a lot of wooden structure there, and they're very concerned about if you get a fire going and not know where the cutoffs are, even on like within a couple of houses, you could have something quickly get out of hand. So yeah, I'll reinforce that Japan is way ahead in terms of their efforts in that regard. Yep.
You mentioned wooden pipes.
St. Paul still has wooden pipes in the ground.
Wooden pipes. I had
Wooden
no
pipes.
idea.
What's that?
I had no idea.
Yeah, no, there is, trust me, there is such a thing.
I just did a Google search on it. It's unbelievable.
Say, does in this effort is there any, for the people who generate the utility data to go out there as a WFS or WMS, is there any you mentioned 5 centimeters as far as a part of the parameters of accuracy, but as far as schemas of data and the ability to interrogate that data, maybe at the OCC or in other systems that might run in parallel, is there any recommended schemas or select attributes, such as, hey, you're looking at this underground line, and we know that line has been located by as-built map, or it's been located by, we excavated it and we know where that is, and or we traced it, something that gives the people an idea of the provenance of the location of these things. You guys get into
Yeah,
that?
so that's, again, that goes back to that great taste, less filling slide. The standards for construction, and I hope there might be an expert on the line here that they can fill us in a little bit more, but they basically have an A through D designation as to the level, and that American Society of Civil Engineering standard is actually going to get, we heard it was going to be released earlier this year. Now we're hearing it's later this year. We'll be updating all of that type of standard for, as an item gets built, what things should be recorded to what level of specificity, and then what appropriate assignment is there for the quality of the locate or as-built data. And then, of course, Charlie, you're also up against the issue of there's going to be different levels of accuracy within databases themselves as to how they were created, who created them, what exactness. So those are all things in this next phase that we're going into that we're going to have to wrestle with in terms of how do we try to define those standards so that as anybody goes to use the data, they have a sense of the level of accuracy that data is actually, and again, we can circle right back to that San Bruno incident where, the pipeline blew up because they really didn't have a good understanding of what kind of pipe it was and what the wall size was of it and so on and so forth. And those are all the sorts of things that we're going to have to define as part of this project.
Yes.
It would be interesting to see if there's kind of a before and after statistic of actually bringing hits down. I understand that a single fiber optic hit for the DOT is a $30,000 thing just for that hit. And then all of the people who are, if the communications don't run around that and get back to people, you have a lot of people sitting on their hands with no communication. So it's not the $1 billion hit. It's not the thing that Willis Re or some of the big reinsurance companies are going to get involved with, but maybe they should be involved with this stuff, huh?
Okay. Unless there are some more questions, we will officially adjourn